recording anything previously. Hello. Thank you. So just looking at some of these cross sections and partial on here, but I don't know what. So, we got this trim right here over the head of the window, and we've got some, looks like some little side pieces. I don't see anything under any of the windows, so I think that's the architectural style. That makes it a little easier for the water to drain off, but let me make that a little bigger. So, and just looking at the elevations, you can see for the doors and windows, we have some bit of trim, but I didn't see anything specifically called out for that trim. So that's another one where you're just going to have to probably take a guess at. We're using cement board siding, so I guess you could make that out of cement board. It could be a wood trim, could be a vinyl trim. I just have to make an assumption or trim by others and exclude it from the contract. So, and that's the type of stuff, like I said, that often gets overlooked and comes back to haunt you. So you'll notice that on up above here, we have them. Down below here, there is no trim on the windows. And I'm assuming that's by design because this lower 12 feet or so is stucco. Now we also have some trim shown here. And that has me a little bit concerned, mainly because it appears to stick out from the wall. And so we're going to need some flashing to protect the stucco. We're going to need some flashing between the bottom of this siding and this molding, which I'm assuming looks, I'll draw a little picture here and then we can see. Yeah, that may not be right. So I think this actually comes up like this. As I said, we spent a lot of time trying to figure out exactly what the architect is trying to do.
That's a belly board, isn't it? Or the...
Well, I'm not sure. So if we look at this.
Mr. Wong was talking about, Professor Wong was talking about delineating between the various materials using trim.
Yeah, and I think you can do that, but how are we doing it? I'm not quite sure because there's a couple ways we could do it. So if I just have the framing coming down, which if this is the stud, now I'm going to have some paper behind the boards, and right here, we've got this little shelf and this little trim piece down below. Now, whether that sits outside, whether that is totally outside of the line of the finish or whether that acts as a shelf and we've got to bring some flashing down. And normally I would expect that to kind of do something like that for the flashing. And then we would still need to do something for the stucco that's below this. And so that's where often you start running into problems. So I would I would want to get something from the architect, I would hope, on how that's going to be done, because there's probably about 10 different ways I could do it. In the elevations, if I see one, yeah, right up here. See, it looks like that whole thing comes out beyond the line of the finish. And so I'm just not sure how all that fits together, but I do know when you put a ledge like that, you're going to trap water. You're going to have water coming down there, and that's going to be a problem later. And what I'm looking for, again, as part of the risk analysis, is we've got a 1-year warranty on the work we do. However, if it's a latent defect and doesn't follow some standard, I've got up to a 10-year window where they can come back and try and sue me for a latent defect built into the structure. So, and you know, there's a lot of lineal footage there. It doesn't look like a lot, but we've got a lot of lineal footage in this, and flashing, depending on whether it's custom or whether I can use the standard, is pretty expensive. So, but it would have been nice to have a detail there. So I generate something. Now for the siding takeoff, and I've done the siding takeoff, I just ignored the openings. They're not huge on this, and every time you got to cut stuff up, it increases the amount of waste anyway. So normally they just ignore the cutouts for that. And I don't know, the areas that often get overlooked or get missed if you're doing the takeoff is the gable end piece. And you'll get the height here, which I just put some numbers on here. And I scaled this, because that was what I had. Oh, and that was about, I think 6 feet is about what I figured somewhere. There we are, about in there. So whether it's 5.5 feet or 6 feet, I use 6 feet because I'm not sure exactly where the siding stops. From a flashing standpoint, you know, it might actually make more sense to do something like that, which you can't see. Where this would be the flashing, and then I'd run a little bead of caulk right along there probably is how I would approach that, just to keep water from getting up and behind or in the stucco. If I try and put flashing out here and run it just to the edge, the water will run back
under it, right?
and get into the crack. So, so it's a pretty detail, and it breaks up the line and gives you some definition, and it's very architectural. The problem is that's where the leaks come from later.
You could cut a drip into that one piece of molding too, the upper portion.
Yeah, I could put a little kerf or something. So right there, I could.
Like nail flashing, you mean?
So I mean, I could put a kerf in there.
Yeah.
So where this would be the kerf. Again, I've got to do more work, and I don't know what the material is exactly. So I'd have to come up with the plan for how that was going to go. But I do know that I have a problem where we have to change the materials from the cement board, which is not going to be waterproof. So I've got paper under there somewhere. I need paper behind the stucco too. But exactly how to protect that joint, I'm not 100% sure.
Larry, quick question. At the where the stucco ends, I've seen a lot of guys use it's not metal flashing over at the bottom. They use like kind of like vinyl. I don't know if you know what material that is.
Well,
You have
there
any
are
idea?
there are a lot of
Because I
PVC
haven't seen that.
flashings.
Oh, okay. Is that like a new material or is it? It's been there a while.
No,
You
the
know?
plastic's been around for a while. The problem is that up until recently, plastic was usually more expensive than a metal flashing.
Oh, okay.
And, the metal flashing will rust out, so it has a definite lifespan. So that's something else you would need to consider. Galvanized sheet metal, a lot of times, if you're using the very thin minimum building code 26 gauge,
Oh,
depending on the exposure, it may start rusting out in somewhere between 5 and 15 years.
Larry, quick information. Last time we did the stacco in the building over here for city, there is a wire mesh underneath of the stacco where they
Yeah.
hang up the
Yeah,
paper. At the end of it, there is a piece of metal to cut each 10 feet.
Yeah, there's a drip screed at the bottom. So at the bottom, we have a weep screed or a drip screed that fits behind. Well, that looks
the stucco finish, right?
right. So we have the slab, sill plate, stucco comes down. Building code requires
Yep.
a weep screed.
What is it, 5 inches or so? Or no?
Yeah, it has a minimum flange width going up. I mean, it's pretty standard. So what we're going to have is we're going to have, usually you have line wire
Yeah.
or stucco mesh. There's a bunch of proprietary systems out there too, but this is the screed. This has holes in it.
Yeah.
So the paper laps over the screed. Paper comes down over the flange on the screed. This is 2 inches above concrete or 4 inches above dirt minimum.
Mm.
Larry, the 4 inch above the finishing, is it according to the architect or it's a?
No, that's a building code requirement. So if we go into either the Uniform Building Code or the IRC, the California Residential Code or the California Building Code, that's in the section on stucco. So standard is a 3-coat. You put a scratch coat, a brown coat, and then there's a finish coat. So scratch coat goes on first. It's the thickest. That can be either machine applied where they spray it on, or it can be troweled on by hand. So the purpose of the, and then they come back before it hardens, and they actually rake with a bunch of little wire fingers that coat. So that provides the interlock or the base for the brown and finish coat.
Yeah.
So there's some period of time. So let me find something, just 1 second.
There's for school, Mama.
Larry, quick question. Is
Yeah.
it there's a difference between residential and commercial for the stacco?
Not for stucco. It's the same thing. There are a bunch of proprietary systems because there's a bunch of fake stucco, there's power wall, there's ephes, which looks kind of like stucco, where they're putting foam and then they just put a thin cementitious layer. They typically take the foam and there's some fiberglass mesh typically that goes over the foam, and then they have just a real thin coat that goes over that. But we can take a look at both.
Because Larry, I'm asking, I'm pretty much sure we have 2-inch with the finishing on the concrete right
Yeah.
next to the door, because I am the one who bought the threshold. Is it 2-inch? So I'm really sure about the stucco. It was 2-inch above the finishing. Does that make any sense?
Well, I'm not sure. I'd have to see exactly what we're talking about. So let me get out of this and we can go look at, I think, some stucco installation. So get a little bit better feeling
What's-
for it.
Larry, what's the
Share.
minimum overlap of the screed?
The
Do you know?
screed? The
Or does
screed
it
is
really-
just supposed to come down. It's normally at the base of the wall, and then you have to adjust it a little bit. Can you see this thing?
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah, we
this
can.
is, and this is pretty much based on the code or based on the ASTMs. And so this talks about the stucco and the standard. I could probably make a copy and send it to you, or I'll pull the stuff out of the code. So 3-coat is the conventional way of doing it. They have some 1-coat and 2-coat systems out there. So normal weight's around 10 pounds a square foot. We got a weather barrier. We've got the lath. So if you hear them talking about chicken wire, it's a hexagonal lath that has a minimum weight. It is galvanized, and it will, over time, it may rust. So the finish coat or the top coat, it can be any color or texture. So that's something else you would look at. The way this looks is probably smooth, but there are a lot of different stucco textures that you can use for something like this. We don't care about that. Lead credits, environmental, that's all pretty much nonsense. So this is showing it over wood. If you put it over wood sheathing, then you have to use 2 layers of building paper rather than 1. That's what they're showing here. Moisture protection barrier, 2 layers. Let's see if I can get that to. We don't care about that. So here's the chicken wire here that goes behind it. Whatever the mix goes. So here's we have a base coat. Here's the screed down at the bottom. And so that flange has a minimum height per the code. And so that's just a standard stucco screed. The paper comes down over that. As the paper goes up, it has to be lapped, as I remember, a minimum of 2 inches, because the rolls are typically about 3 feet. And so then they have some of these other systems. See, this is more like EFIS, where we're putting some rigid insulation behind it. And then we're just putting a very thin coat of the cementitious material over it. See that this is a bit thicker. So sometimes when they're trying to get that Spanish look or a little heavier look, or a lot of the commercial stuff is actually an EFIS based system. So here they're using this 1-coat too but this is over a gypsum sheathing. So DIN shield or something like that is what they normally might use. And let me see if I can pull this back down. So yeah, so here's what they refer to as EFIS, exterior insulation and finish systems. But you know what we're using, I would assume, based on looking at it in the plans, is we've got our typical 3-coat traditional stucco. All right, we've got the scratch and then the brown coat. So that's what they call it here. So if you look under the 3-coat, scratch coat, so you say it's 3/8 to a 1/2 inch. And again, that can be either sprayed or troweled on. They then rake that to set up a bunch of little grooves. That acts as an interlock for the material that gets put over it. And you got to wait and do some other things. So, and then let me get out of here. So, and I may have even tortured you once before with some of this stuff. I think that's the one I want. So can you see this image is a stucco texture?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this is where the big changes in cost. For that color coat, they also have some special finish materials that are very expensive, like $50 for about 100 square feet. But they have all kinds of different textures that you can put on. So probably a smooth sanded coat, like this plaster texture, or a skip trowel are the ones that tend to be most common. Some of these actually have names. I was looking for the swirly ones where they do the circles. But as you can see, there is a Latham Plastering Institute. They have some standards on this stuff too. But you know, the price. So normally we're just gonna use a standard type finish, because for some of this you actually have to bring in an artiste or somebody that specializes in these decorative patterns, and then you're going to pay a whole bunch more money. So again, we don't deduct for the openings unless, you know, for a garage door, a big overhead door, we might, but otherwise they have additional work that they have to do around the openings in terms of reinforcing and the stucco mesh.
Stucco trim.
Yeah, where's I was looking for something. Let me. So this trowel sweep that they're showing here, that's fairly popular around here. If you talk to different people, they might call this a skip trowel, this one that's called heavy lace. But you can see that there are differences. So yeah, there's one right around the corner from me that has this kind of trowel sweep, but even on that, it can vary quite a bit. They also have another one where they kind of do this, do little furrows up and down. So on commercial projects, what you're going to have that adds to the cost is you're going to have to prepare a sample. And so usually that's a 1 yard by 1 yard sample, and that's a mock-up. And you get the finish to the point where the owner's happier, or the client's happier, the architect, whoever is doing that kind of quality control or administration, and then you keep that sample on the job, and that becomes the basis for whether or not the stucco's okay or not okay. And again, if you have to do that, then you figure there's a good chance if you have to do a sample for them that they're not going to like it the first time. So normally I figure that for mock-ups, you may have to do it at least twice. And if I got a real fussy person, maybe more. So I don't want that. So anyway, and that's why, you know, you have to ask a lot of questions. And if I don't ask the questions, then I'm just going to specify some industry standard on that particular texture. Let me get out of there. Maybe. Trying to upload something on the screen. So the unit of measure is going to be the square yard. So we're just going to figure up the square footage, divide it by 9. That'll give us the square yards. We're going to have a square yard price. We're going to need some scaffolding in terms of estimating. You know, if we have a second floor, there may be an extra for the scaffolding. In some cases, the plaster will provide it. In some cases, if you don't ask the plaster to provide the required scaffolding, then you're going to have to provide that for them. In places where they have enough access, they might come in with a cherry picker and do some of that. And I'm trying to find what I'm looking for here. Just a minute. So let me share. If you want me to send any of this stuff, we can.
You send the stucco.
So can you see this?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we got
Yeah.
some window flashing. You can see the window flashing. We've got the
Nice
building
job.
paper behind it. And we've got the chicken wire or the stucco. So, and that's typically just stapled on. They used to use a self-furring nails for that, but I think that practice, that was old style, old time. And so this is some of the code stuff. Maybe I'll save this and send it out.
Is there a difference, Larry, with moist stop when you're doing siding and stucco? Like
Yeah, they have wood stucco stops or molds. There's also some slightly different ways to terminate this. You see, this isn't terminating in a screed per se. They've got some other type of system. The problem is In this, you'd have to have some holes in the bottom because you don't want to
Right.
trap water behind the stucco. I don't know what that's a picture of, but that's all just blah, blah, blah stuff on energy. Going to be talking about the windows. And again, you're just going to plan on the cheap. There's a number of ways to flash a window. If you buy a window these days, though, you're supposed to install it per the manufacturer's instructions. And so what that means is, in most cases, you can't use the cheap window flashing. So the normal stuff, we call it sisal craft, is a bituminous based material with a paper facing. And so that's the cheap stuff. But because of all the lawsuits, you are now supposed to install the window per the manufacturer's instructions. That means you usually, on many of them, have to build a pan underneath the window so that if the leaks around the edges, there's a pan at the bottom that can be made out of flashing that will intercept the water and keep it from getting inside the house. And so that may increase your installation cost quite a bit more than what you'd really planned on if you haven't paid attention. So here they're using a proprietary flashing around the window. So normally we do this shingle style. The bottom goes on first, the sides go on and lap over the bottom, and then the top typically comes across and goes over. Here this little patch, I think, is because they have to cut out for the house wrap that they're using. And I know they had to change some of the house wraps because originally the stucco was sticking to the house wrap and trapping the water. So this stuff you can kind of see, it looks like it's set up to have some little drainage channels vertically in the house wrap, and that's so the water doesn't get trapped between the wrap and the stucco, which it'll sometimes stick to. I don't think that's what I wanted anyway, but it's kind of interesting for me. And so some people will see on the paper, I'm getting a little far afield, excuse me, but I had somebody ask me about this. There's a 60-minute rating on the paper. That doesn't mean that's for a firewall. It's supposed to take about that long if you have water on the outside of the paper and it doesn't drain off, that it would take about that long for the moisture to penetrate that particular type of paper. And some of it is stamped with 60 minutes. And so I had somebody asking me about that. Here's that 3-coat plaster system we were talking about, ASTM 926. This is all out of the code. Hasn't changed between the 92 code and the current code. We don't care about any of that right now. I'm trying to find the screeds. And so this is always a problem area. Here they've put in a little piece of flashing over the door to drain the water away. Sometimes they'll try and angle that a little bit so the water drains off to one side or another rather than dripping down directly on the door. This is some rigid insulation behind it. So this is one of those proprietary systems. Something else with these windows now is a lot of the manufacturers want some sort of sealant, a sealant bead all the way around the window underneath the flange. And again, that's to try and help keep the water out. See, we have a bit of a lap here. And so that's usually specified. Typically that's either 2 or 6 inches that's required. Still looking for the screed. There's some new requirements on ledgers. The ledger has to be spaced out per the new code if you have a deck. We don't have one of those, so we don't need to worry about that here. Still looking for the screed. More chicken wire. Here's that one coat they were talking about for the other stuff. Still not seeing the screed. And you can see some of this extra reinforcing around the windows. There's a control joint. Now our plan doesn't show any control joints, so I wouldn't expect there to be any. Everything you want to know about stucco and a few things you didn't.
Could you email that to me, Larry?
Yeah, I'll make a copy of it and I'll email it out to everybody. I don't want to spend too much more time on it, but like I said,
Yeah.
there's
There it is.
yeah, so here's the thought I was getting that just a second. There it is.
On the top.
Maybe. So here's our weep screed or stucco screed. And again, this kicks out. The reason I do it this way is this acts as a stop for the stucco at the bottom. So they've got the self-furring lath, which is what they use now. There's some other stuff that they used to use. The cement plaster goes on. If you've got sheathing, there's some additional concern. So over our shear panels, for example, we would need to use at least 2 layers of paper in those particular areas. Here's that flange, and they're showing a minimum of a 3.5 inch flange, and I think a lap of 2 inches with the paper. And now what this says, water resistant barriers should lap over the attachment flange at least 2 inches.
Mhm.
And then they're telling you can either lap that screed where you splice it, or you can butt it together. But if you butt it together, you have to make sure that your water resistant barrier, if you hear the term WRB, that's a water resistant barrier. That's what they refer to the exterior material now. And they used to just say, you know, house wrap or felt. Now it's WRB, which I always have to try and figure out what it is. I always think that stands for West Rancho Bernardo. And then here's our 4 inches above the dirt. And if you go into the code, it's 2 inches minimum above concrete. That's why I was saying early on when we were talking about this, I was concerned about the step down slabs that were only 3/4 of an inch, because if we have stucco over those,
So it is saying 2 inch above the concrete, huh?
yeah,
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
yeah. So I'll send this out too, but I'll make a copy and send the other out. And I didn't mean to get quite so wrapped up in this, but like I
No,
said,
that's
I'm a
cool,
little
man.
drifty tonight. So
So what happens at the top of the stucco?
they just butt it up, right? So it depends. We have a couple things. A lot of what they used to do. I can draw a little detail.
It depends if you have a soffit or if it is on the.
Yeah, let me draw a detail here. And as soon as I get the detail drawn, I'll throw it up there. Let me unshare this. And now I got to reshare. Do I see what I'm looking for? No.
No.
So let me get out of here for a second. Okay, now let me see if I can share. There we are. So this is the standard detail. So they used to just put the blocking out perpendicular. It sticks out 1.5 inches. The stucco's only 3/4, and they just butt it up there. There's also you can buy a piece of sheet metal, a stucco stop, that looks like that. So it's like a reglet. I don't know if you can see that. Let me blow that up.
I can see it fine.
Okay. Well,
Isn't
we'll
that
make a
bad for
little-
your shear transfer detail though?
Well, it is or it isn't. For shear transfer, I can do a number of things, right? I can. And that's something else we have some problems with, because if you're in a very high fire hazard zone, you can't have this 2x framing out here at the sticking beyond the wall. And so you either have to put a soffit in here, or you have to go to 4x6 tails or something like that. What the code considers 1 hour. But if we want to do shear transfer, we can put boundary nailing there, and we can put A35 bent, or one of those LS 3s, 5s, 9s in there.
Okay.
And that'll get the shear. But see, what they used to do, what used to be standard, is out here exposed, they'd use a 1x shiplap or TNG. So rather than this, we would have, if you look at a lot of the houses in your neighborhood, and that's because when you look up here, then you're just seeing the underside. Excuse me, I didn't draw that quite right. That would stop here. And so that way they just paint the underside, and all you're seeing is the shiplap rather than because what kind of plywood are we using here normally?
OSB.
3/4.
Yeah, either CDX
Oh, okay.
or OSB. And is that what you want to see when you're looking up? You're either looking at the C side or the D side on the plywood, which allows open nuts. And so normally people don't like that look. And OSB doesn't weather real well when it's exposed. It kind of puffs and it starts to flake. So they used to use just a 1x6 or 1x4 T&G or a shiplap on the outside. The thickness was close enough that it matched the roof sheathing, the 1/2-inch roof sheathing. The problem always was they would run the shiplap up above that block. And when they run the shiplap up above that block, you don't have shear transfer from the roof diaphragm. So some details you'll see will look like this.
A bevel, huh? Yeah, there it is.
So this is just acting as a stucco stop. And they would just run this up so you could do your shear transfer here. You can put a clip in there, or you could also put a block in there and nail. So either a clip or the blocking, although you have to make sure this isn't installed. If that's installed, then you can't face nail directly into it, but a lot of times this gets put in after the fact. Now you've got twice the labor for the blocking. Now you can use an ACX to it, and that A-face is considered to be paintable. But again, it may not meet the very high fire hazard areas, so that'd be something that would show up either as a RFI or something something else. But they do make these little stucco stops that just fit over and you just nail it in. So Fry makes a lot of that stuff. I don't know if you're familiar with Fry reglets. Yay, nay?
No, how do you spell it?
Uh,
F-R-Y?
Let me see. I'll see if I can pull it up here. And the problem with all the sheet metal is it's fairly expensive. There's an E on the end.
Larry, quick question.
Yes.
Sorry. On that Vevo block, the whatever 2x6 I think it is, could
Yeah.
you instead of the block that's on the top plate, could you use an A35? Would that do the same, or
Yeah.
would that pass the inspection? Or
Yeah, you can. You can use an A35 here. The problem is if you're putting in drywall, trusses are normally at 24 inches on center, and usually you need some drywall backing
yeah,
for the nailing, because you get the perimeter nailing on the drywall is normally I think 7 inches for nails and 12 inches for screws, so you still need some backing for the drywall. You don't have to use it.
yeah.
Why? So let me see.
Either
Now
way
we
of those
can-
blocks, either way, inspection would be it would pass inspection, right? Either way, whether it's beveled or
Yeah,
whether
it
it's at an
should pass either
Okay.
way, and you'll see both. But
Oh, okay.
you know, the inspector should get it the way so it's the same thing. You could also put an A35 on the outside.
The L2B4s, right?
Or
Oh, okay. Yeah.
here, and that would be another way to get that shear panel.
Yeah.
So anyway, let me get out of here, show the fry. Hmm. Okay, now you should see something that says fry reglet,
Yep.
correct? Okay, well, I make all kinds of little sheet metal products for stucco and drywall and ceiling systems. So we will look here. I think. And so they make all kinds of little funny little things that where you can stop the drywall, say this reveal channel. You'd have a sheet of drywall coming down or coming across if you turned it 90 degrees. Then you'd have a gap or a space, and then you'd start your drywall again. The problem is those things cost, I don't know, last time I did any pricing was, it's like $5 a lineal foot, $6 a lineal foot. And so it's a little pricey. If you're doing a fancy corner, you might do, a reveal like this one, or just let me see. They've got all kinds of them. Trying to find the one for the corner. This one right here. This stepped outside corner. So if you're trying to give it a more architectural or a more finished look, then this goes in at the corner and then the material comes in back behind here. That gives you a real straight line. But the architects love this stuff. See, there's some bullnose. You want beveled corners. But this is the sort of stuff when you're estimating that will absolutely kill you if you miss it.
Well, the elevations don't show any control joints, so do you think
No.
that they would have control joints?
Yeah, we don't show any. And the reason that they'll sometimes you'll get a continuous reveal or a line above and below the windows because they're trying to minimize the cracking. Every time you put a corner in there, that's an area of increased likelihood for a crack to form. We don't see any of these things shown, but you do want to go through the specifications because sometimes it's not shown on the drawings. It's buried in the specs. And like I said, little things like this will eat you alive because it'll drive up your labor costs a whole bunch. It's something you have to protect. So normally it comes with a little tape, like the stuff that comes on your computer. And then you got to peel that off and clean that mess up too. But these are just a few of the things that they make.
The company in San Diego?
They're all across the U.S. I think it's an
Oh.
international company, but so you've seen this stuff. I know you're all familiar with it. You've seen it. You've walked past it in a building somewhere. You just didn't pay any attention to it.
That's nice.
Where do you buy these things at? Is there like a drywall?
Yeah, normally you can
supply?
either a drywall place might stock some of this, a stucco place might stock some of this. Otherwise, you can order it directly from there'd be an outlet if that's who you're trying to find. I guess they're worried about the COVID contact, but normally what I do if I need some information is I look for the rep locator.
That's nice. That's nice.
you got to figure out. Now we do have some fiber cement panel trim that we might or might not be using, but and years ago, somewhere I probably buried in a back room somewhere, I've got one of the catalogs, because they used to have a nice catalog and you'd have to go through and figure out what you wanted. But this was something that, you know, even doing structural engineering, a lot of times you have to coordinate the structural details with the architectural detailing. That's where the work really is. And some of these things will cause some problems. So just,
Is that the only company that sells that stuff? Or
no, there are other
Mexico?
companies.
Okay.
Fry is, you know, probably
Price wise, do you know?
it's the most established that I know of. It's been around for years and years. They've got a big market share, and they you know, have the money. They're kind of like Simpson, I think, that they've spent a lot of money. And then you may have some custom stuff. You know, a lot of times they'll just have, the architect will just draw a picture of kind of what they think they want done. Nobody knows exactly how to build it. And then you may have to go talk to somebody about that.
Architectural metals.
So, but anyway, what I have found is that, again, this stuff is buried in the specs somewhere. And notice there's no cross through here. You need a mitered corner for that. And that's a special little piece that fits in between the straight line pieces to get that corner. Sometimes, rather than having open on all four sides like this one is, you'll run one of them straight through and then the other one will just butt up to the sides. But that's the architectural stuff. You need to pay attention to that and look at the specs, because again, they'll come back to haunt you later where you thought you had it covered. You spent a lot of money and then it turns out you've got things installed not the way the architect wanted or the owner was expecting. I don't know what they've got there. Let me see. So Homie says up near my sister. So anyway, if you haven't heard of them, like I said, that's just one of those little things that's buried in the specifications often. And then you find out that in order to comply with your contract, you got to spend about $10,000 on the molding, the trim, and it has to be integrated into the job in a way that works for everybody. So, but they're not cheap.
They look nice though.
That's what I remembered. Not cheap. Oh, let me go back. So this is drywall, and that wasn't what I was looking for. So
Siding to, okay.
so we could look at drip screeds.
What are you looking for?
I was looking at some of the drip screeds. because see, they have a variety of drip screeds too, depending on where they are. So these are supposedly built for, see, this is a problem here, this where you have a soffit. A lot of times if they just run the stucco down and they don't provide a curve for a drip or some piece of molding there, what'll happen is the water will run down the vertical face and then it will roll back on the horizontal face and you'll wind up with a bunch of staining near the edge. And it'll break down a little more quickly out there, but these are all kinds of little things. You know, we don't have any soffit vents, so that's not something we normally look at, but that was screeds. And so these are common up in the ceiling where they're trying to allow it to be vented. And so this, like I said, gets attached to the framing and then you've got finish coming over and butting into it or keying into it. So here's a little soffit vent right here, the 7/8. And so the stucco can come in here and the stucco continues on out here and this gets nailed up and this allows airflow up into the building there. So I can look at the PDF. So anyway, there are all kinds of little things out there, but this, my experience is with estimating is often these are the little things that get overlooked. You just throw in a price, you figure, oh yeah, that'll be a couple $100. And then you find out it's a couple $1,000, and so you're a little bit upset.
You're working for free.
Yeah, and so this one is popular for a corner. I don't know if they show the, right, so the stucco would key in from this side and the stucco would key in from this side. This little part here nails into the framing. And then this provides a, you know, kind of a clean modern look. But so there's tons and tons of that stuff. If you want, I'll send you, all you have to do is do a search on Fry and you can track this stuff down. So what time are we getting to be? Oh yeah, so we're in there. So, and looking for my wall finishes. So let me get out of here. Shrink that down. We're out of there. So just looking at that exterior. That light on? So as I said, what often gets overlooked when we're doing the wall takeoffs is these little gable end pieces. And if you notice there at the two porches, there's a couple little triangular pieces of trim up there. And so while those aren't great big pieces, every time you miss 10 or 15 bucks, you miss 10 or 15 bucks plus the markup, plus the overhead, plus the profit. And so those things start to chew away at you. So I came up with about somewhere, I don't know what you came up with. Where do I have these numbers? I think for siding, my total came up to be about 1,215 square feet. So we got the little, on the second floor, that upper, from about 3.5 feet above the second floor, 3 feet above the floor, somewhere up there, the entire second floor, except at the area of the fireplace is sided. I didn't deduct for the fireplace. And then we have the kitchen pop out down below, and then the area at the foyer, which also appears to have some siding on it. I looked at the, what did I do with it now? I just had, oh, here it is. And if you look here, you know, we got some little pieces in here. And we may have a little more over this door. It looks like the ceiling slopes up. I know the foyer ceiling is softened down, but I think the roof appears to be, just goes straight up. I don't think that there's a soffit on that, but they are showing a little bit of this siding here. I would expect that siding to extend above the door too. Probably got a little bit over here. Excuse me. So, and as well as the outside, you got a little piece that's probably going to extend up there. The only place it kind of shows right here. And I think that roof goes up. I couldn't find anything definitive on there, but we've got, little pieces there. And so something like that, how efficient is it to build? You can't see. I can't see. I'm stuck on something. I need to get a different table. Oh, there's the problem. See, we've got these little triangular pieces that also have that siding on it. So number one, is it on the ground? So that's going to take a ladder or a scaffold to get to.
Mhm.
And number two, is it very big? These little pieces. Because that's a small area, my experience, again, just building, is that those things take more time than they should. That's not very efficient working. So those little pieces, to get them right, takes more time usually, but I usually see a little bit of elevated labor. Often in terms of the work of the area you have to do, those little areas get missed too. While we're at it, for the stucco takeoff, I did put some dimensions on the fireplace. Yeah. Because this is stucco. So I had about 18 feet from above there. So, this little area here, the base, I figured that was 4 by 4, 16 square feet. This, I just take the 4 feet and the 2 feet, take the average, which would be 3 feet times 3 feet. So that's about a yard. I've got the little sides here, so a lot of times these get missed. They're a little bit longer, not a big deal. But again, you're going to need scaffolding to do this. You're going to need scaffolding once you get up to about here in order to put this stucco on. So I just need to look at the costing and figure out what we're doing there. So if we look at stucco cost, and I will, like I said, hopefully be more or less recovered enough to get after it. Let me see where the stucco is. And we've got a price on siding. So if you're looking for something, now again, you have to be a little bit careful, you know, what kind of siding. So hardy board, probably one of the more common. Let me blow, can you see that? Yay, nay?
Yeah.
Okay, let me blow this up, I think. Okay, that's a little better. Let me move the pictures over here so I don't have that in my way. And so, you know, whether it's cedar mill smooth, the colonial rough sawn, you know, all of that stuff, again, normally I'd want to figure out, get some local prices. If I was going to price it myself, if I'm going to subcontract it, I just want a general idea. They have some crews, productivity, but you can see the price varies from some cheaper stuff to some more expensive stuff. They figure about 10% waste. I wasn't going to figure any waste on this because if I don't deduct the windows, I figure that's going to cover my material, but it does come in standard lengths. And so I'm not sure how much waste you're actually going to wind up with. You've got those angle cuts, you're going to have more on those. We don't have plywood siding. I don't know if they've got the stucco under plaster or where. And that again is an issue you have to deal with. So plastering by the square yards. So we're not doing plaster though, we are doing exterior plaster. So stucco. So this is the standard. And they're showing a price of about. Now, if you notice there, they're not giving us a lot of different finishes, but is there a difference in price between the textured finish and the dash finish, for example? Yay, nay?
Yeah, there's a difference.
Yeah, and so to me, it's fairly significant. You know, we're talking 2150 a square yard versus 2830, and that's significant. If we have any soffits, which I don't think we do in this, but if we had a soffit, again, that's overhead, and that's going to cost a little bit more money. And so we're seeing that on wood frame now, if you look below, you got to be careful when you're looking at these things. You will notice that we have a significantly higher cost. And that deduction for paper-backed lath is there are some proprietary systems where the paper and lath come out as one piece. And so you don't have a separate installation for that.
What's the difference there between exterior plaster stucco and Portland cement plaster?
They're both the same thing. Interior plaster is a lime plaster typically versus Portland cement. The Portland cement holds up better to for exterior use. It can take water. The interior plaster, the lime plaster, is not as stable and it tends to break down in the presence of water.
Well, the Portland cement plaster there is $36.20. It's more expensive, right?
Yeah, but
By a decent amount.
that's what stucco. The stucco we have around here typically is that Portland cement plaster. And I'll have to do a little bit of research on that, but so you can apply it to steel framing or wood framing. I'll try and between now and next Monday, I'll try and call Craftsman and see if they can shed any light on that, but that's probably a good question. I think there's more prep on the wood. They don't give us a lot of information there. So again, not my specialty, other than I have worked with a fair amount of it, but that one I'll have to do a little bit of research on and get back to you.
Okay.
So, and I figured we had about 12 feet when I scaled it. The stucco comes up about 12 feet. So I was just using that as a height. The fireplace I did a separate takeoff on, and I think that covered the stucco, but I'll try and get this assembled and out. Any other questions?
No.
Probably tortured you enough. It's probably late enough. Well, I got a class starting in 2 minutes, so I guess so. So anyway, I appreciate your patience. Said I hope to be back feeling normal here in a day or two and get caught up with some of this. I'll if I don't send you anything by Friday, just send me a nasty little email and say, what are you doing?
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Larry.
Okay,
you,
thank
sir.
you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Take care, man.
All
well.
right. Okay,
Take care, guys.
all right. Well, I gotta stop that.